Oh my dear God, it's almost World War III. Do you ever think something matters to you, and then something really terrible happens and you realize it never mattered in the first place? Like some streamer gets exposed for having horse on his computer, and you're like, oh, that's crazy, I really care about this. And then all of a sudden, China invades Taiwan, and it's like, Father, guide my body and tongue towards salvation. Use me as a vessel for your message and deliver me from evil during this darkest night. This is where art is at in 2024. We imagine all the ways that art matters, all the ways that art has changed the world and forged history during tough times. And then tough times start to happen, and all of a sudden making art about it seems derivative and tasteless. Art doesn't stop wars, save lives, or change minds. But that wasn't always the case. Art literally used to change minds. Art used to forge history. Art used to be the primary medium for which the public understood the realities of war and the realities of tragedy. Up until very recently, art was basically all we had. But when did this change? And where are we now? To understand this, we have to get an understanding of art's purpose. We're gonna talk to some people who know more than me to figure out what art even is. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why art will never again change the world, why this isn't a bad thing, and what happens next. This is the Alexander Mosaic. Dated to around 100 BC and found in the House of Fawn in Pompeii, well preserved under a thick layer of ash. The mosaic depicts the Battle of Issus, which took place in 333 BC between the outnumbered Macedonian troops led by Alexander the Great and the Achaemenid Empire led by Darius III, in which the Macedonians defeated Darius. But enough boring history. F the dates. F the names. That's all autistic data points that don't actually matter to anything. You know what makes you actually intelligent? Figuring out why things exist. Figuring out the greater pattern that interlaces all of reality. So, why does this mosaic exist? The Romans basically copied the entirety of Greek culture because they had an inferiority complex to the Greeks. Because Greek politics, Greek culture, Greek art was so successful, they're like, we might as well replicate this. This might as well make this work for us. And they're like, wow, Alexander the Great, that represents the Romans. That represents the Roman spirits. We love Alexander the Great. And he won this war even though he's outnumbered and he's hot and he's stoic, and Darius III is like a scared little beta in this mosaic, and the Romans see this, they're like, yeah, I love myself. I love being Roman. It's propaganda. It's not propaganda like, you know, convincing you of a specific idea or ideology. It's propaganda like you look at it and you think, hell yeah, I'm awesome. And it's an image of a battle. It's an image of a war to coerce you into believing that like that you're a dope dude. And this is the primary purpose of art during times of trouble for now. And why wouldn't it be? At this point in history, there is no artists. There are no artists ideologically driven, toiling away, trying to tread new psychic ground, subsisting off Costco chickens and Josh, working their way through an MFA by making TikToks and which oil paint texture is most similar to cum. Artists are tradesmen, the same way like a roofer or a bricklayer is a tradesman. They are fulfilling a specific need, producing images that people commission them to produce. Their names, their intentions, what they believe, it just doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
It's very fine art, and if you will compare it to the art in the World Wars, that's very blocky. It's very direct. It's for common people.
This is Rudyard, a YouTuber and historian who goes under the name What If Alt Hist. All the conversations in this video will be available on my Patreon for $250 USD. If you like what I do and you find value in it, subscribe to my Patreon and subscribe to me on YouTube.
With the Alexander Mosaic, it's for Alexander's nobility. The guys who are leading these armies, they'll look at it and because they grew up educated in how to look at those things, art for the aristocracy will be less blunt and more subtle than art for the general population. It's like classical music versus classic rock.
This is The Procession of the Magi, a mural painting in the prayer room in the Medici family palace in Florence, painted between 1459 and 1462. The Medici family was a banking family and a political dynasty that ruled Florence in the early 15th century. There's a lot of wealth inequality at this point in Europe, and people like this had so much f***ing money that they just had to waste it. They would commission giant paintings like this to not only flex their wealth, but to also flex their knowledge. A painting like this is so rich with tiny specific references that it can only really be understood in the context it was created in. Asking a contemporary historian to understand this painting fully would be like asking a medieval peasant to understand this image. Like this aspect here, Cosimo de' Medici, the founder of the Medici family dynasty, is riding a mule while everyone else is riding horses. You know who else rode a mule? A special little guy named Jesus Christ. What I'm getting at is, just like the Alexander Mosaic, this is a giant propagandistic flex, made for those in the know, by those in the know. But Art Chad, you may ask, you've talked only about elites. You've talked about elite artists and elite artwork. Where's the common man? Where is the peasant during all of this time? Where's the common guy? Where's me? Starving to death and dying of consumption by the age of 12. Like Rudyard mentioned, the whole cacophony of war and art was participated in by the higher classes, by the elites, and the peasant was literally irrelevant. But this doesn't last forever. As society industrializes, power deconcentrates, people stop dying of consumption at the age of 12 and actually live long enough and own enough to have a stake in the society they live in. And the more people that have a stake in society, the more willing they are to fight for that society. This is when war stops being small and aristocratic and starts becoming large and existential. And now that war includes everybody, art has to evolve to reflect that new reality. In November 1807, Napoleon marched through Spain in order to get to Lisbon, Portugal, the last port in Europe that was still open to trade with the British. Somewhere along the way, Napoleon decided to occupy Spain as well, even though they were allies. Because why not dominate? This begins the Peninsular War, the bloodiest conflict in Spain's modern history. Then, we have Francisco Goya, the court painter in Spain. You probably know him from Saturn devouring his sons. Goya wanted to remain the court painter, so when the French came and occupied Spain, and Napoleon's brother Joseph took the throne in Spain, Goya got to keep his job, even painting Joseph at one point. But Goya is seething this whole time. War is on the doorstep of Madrid, and civilians are facing the brunt of this conflict, often forming little militias to fight the French instead of the Spanish army. This is where the term guerrilla warfare comes from, a derivative of the Spanish word for war, guerra. Guerrilla means little war. Anyways, Goya is seething, and as soon as the Peninsular War is over, as soon as the French are out of Spain, Goya, still being the court painter, asks the provisional government if you can make a painting to memorialize all the people that lost their lives during the occupation. The provisional government agrees, and Goya goes on to paint one of the hardest fucking paintings of all time. This is the Enter the 36 Chambers of Art. This is the painting that ushers in modern art as a concept. The 3rd of May, 1808. The 3rd of May, 1808 depicts Spanish citizens being executed by French soldiers. And what's important here is this isn't a commissioned, lore-heavy work of opulence like our last two examples. This is Goya working as an independent artist, as an independent thinker, to make sense of the French occupation, depicting the victims of the war, depicting the regular citizen who got caught up in all this during the occupation and had to defend their city out of necessity. This is one of the earliest examples of artwork seemingly created for the average person to enjoy. This is what marks the transition from pre-modern to modern art. And this trend continues. For example, Gustave Courbet's Stonebreakers, which depicts the lower classes working the fields in rural France. Or most of Edouard Monet's work during the reign of Napoleon III.
I'm glad you teased that out, because the Spanish campaign and the Napoleonic Wars, it's very much one of a kind. The reason France could conquer almost all of Europe is because France was a fake democracy. They could pull on the entire public to fight the total war. And so what that meant is the French could get a lot more men to fight, and they could get them to fight harder. Spain was a French ally. The French backstabbed Spain, conquered it, and then the Spanish government fell apart. But what happened then was the Spanish people rebelled against the French, where just random Spanish peasants would team up with guns. The reason it's so gory and stuff is that it was like actual Spanish people who were seeing gore. It's very visceral and it's very close.
Now that the average person had a stake and had a voice, and now that war and tragedy was all encompassing, everyone was getting killed. There was a strong need for the average person to be reflected in artwork that was commenting on culture and tragedy. And among many, many others, Goya and Manet embody this shift. Yet their work is still gatekept. This is because art is still an elitist institution. It's still locked up behind private salons and private galleries. And it's not until a bit later that art is both created for the average person and exhibited for the average person. For that, we have to look at Dix. Otto Dix. Otto Dix was an artist and a World War I veteran whose work was heavily inspired by the horrors he experienced in World War I as a heavy machine gunner. Much of his art was distributed in print form and was popular in post-World War I Germany. His painting Trenches, which depicted in immense oil paint detail the horrors of trench warfare, was hidden from public view in its gallery when it was first exhibited, as it was considered too grotesque and dishonored World War I veterans. Critics said that it weakened the necessary interwar readiness of people and offered people no moral or artistic gain. In fact, this painting would go on to be featured in Hitler's degenerate art exhibition, sold for $200, and eventually lost to history. This black and white image is all that remains of this painting. And it's here that we have an example of art making the full transition from being an elitist force to a commoner force. The average person sees their interests reflected back at them in art that was made by them for them. And this is it. We did it. We saved art. For now. So what happened? Art got worse, right? That's what happened to everything. Everything sucks now. Everything got worse. Last 50 years, horrible. I hate society. I hate culture. I just want to go back to the way things used to be. Everything used to be so sick, now everything sucks, dude. I hate reality. I hate being alive. No, art didn't get worse. There's plenty of wonderful pieces of contemporary art created in the last few decades. Art didn't get worse, but it did become useless. And there's two reasons for this. One is metaphysical and esoteric, and one makes perfect sense. So let's start with the fun one. As we know, art was elitist hoo-ha, and then it modernizes to become for the people by the people. But then it starts to get weird. Art starts to become idiosyncratic. When there is an absence of grand narrative, all psychic structures become idiosyncratic and self-referential. When this starts to happen at this point in history, we are post-World War II, and humanity is traumatized by the horrors it has committed. Nothing makes sense anymore. There is no God, there is no truth, there is no progress, there is nothing tying humanity together. Nothing makes sense, yet we still make art. And we have to rationalize this. So we begin to build an intellectual and academic canon on why we make art. Art no longer reflects the real world, it just reflects itself. Art theory, art philosophy, university degrees, and art that doesn't favor the system doesn't make the cut. It's ignored entirely. It took 4,000 years for art to descend from the castle walls into the hands of the average person, just to be locked right back up again. And this is why people have an instinctual reaction against contemporary art. It's because it's not made for them. You shouldn't be blamed for feeling stupid when you look at a piece of contemporary art and don't understand it. Art that is made to comment on tragedy, art that is made to comment on tough times, sort of always comes across as tasteless and derivative, because there is nothing more separate from the world of the average person than the art world. They're like two sides of a binary. Nothing is pure anymore. Every piece of art now has like 9 layers of gatekeeping and marketing schemes behind it. You think people are too stupid to notice this? This is famous contemporary artist Ai Weiwei. You know what he's doing here? He's pretending to be a dead Syrian kid washed up on a beach. He thought this was a good idea. You know how bad this went over? This went over so poorly for his career, he had to make good art to apologize.
If you read like modern academia, if you look at our culture, the people who are doing this clearly have very high IQs, but they lack any moral standards to which to assess themselves, which is why we get crap like this. We are a society that became so intelligent we became stupid. It circles back around.
And now, for the practical reason art no longer matters during war, we have the internet. We have live videos, we have raw images, and we have memes. If art's purpose during war, if art's purpose during tough times is to bolster beliefs and spread an ideology, then that pales in comparison to memes. And if art's purpose during tough times is to spread the reality of the conflict and the reality of the tragedy to as many people as possible, then that pales in comparison to live videos and images. There is no need for a painting like Trenches or 3rd of May 1808 when every soldier on every side of every conflict has a body camera. And there's no need for something like the Alexander Mosaic when you can go watch a Hyperborean schizo edit about dying in a war. Combine the fact that art is now idiosyncratic with the fact that it's not even necessary to communicate reality anymore. And now it feels like we're hauling the corpse of art around like Weekend at Bernie's. We act and pretend as if art still has an impact, even though it doesn't. I was in my undergrad at art school when Trump got elected. You know how traumatizing that was? You know how much fucking garbage my eyes had to take in? Why did anyone make any of this? Did they think they were gonna change the world by making this? No. And all that does is make people hate art. I made this video not because I want people to stop making art, but because I want you to stop pretending that art matters in the way it used to. Stop pretending that you're making art for some higher purpose. We could make art that is actually artistically revolutionary and no longer derivative. We could make art that isn't gonna end up in a liberal cringe compilation. Make it honestly, make it about what matters to you. And the only way to make art that matters is to not kill yourself. You can't make stuff when you're dead, so you have to make as much things as possible while you're alive.